the conversation. It's the conversation. Y'all ready? Let's go. No filter, no restrictions. You about to give my opinion in its purest form. So my words, don't try to spin them. What I said is what I said. And what I said, I meant it. The gloves are off now when I'm coming out swinging. So engage in verbal combat, but you better be ready. Cause this here for me is light work, even if the topic's heavy. I'm ready for it all with no running from nothing. You just take the time to digest what I put in, no rushing. But time is moving, don't waste it. You want the real, come and face it. Come sit and talk to me if you want it straight without a chaser. And it might burn a little when you step on up to taste it. But it's nothing harsh, I promise. Just a little conversation.
Well, welcome back to the conversation. Head and Dave, your political nut jobs at work again, right? That's what we get called on social media. Political nut jobs.
Okay.
There's a lot happening. What? Go ahead, Eric. You love it?
Yeah, I love it.
It's the funny thing is before I deactivated Facebook last week, I had a couple of friends that on their posts, because as you guys have seen, I've been critical of Trump. And
Hard not to be.
I said, man, this man is so dumb. And one of my friends said, I wish I was as dumb as this man. And I'm like, you don't want to be anything like this man, or you wouldn't be my friend. And then I saw on their post says, I'm going to block people who just keep talking bad about Trump. This is getting out of hand. And I'm sitting there, I got blocked, and I'm sitting there thinking, the amount of stuff I watched these people say about Obama after he would say hello and didn't block them. And you go on a 2-week rant about Trump and you got to get out of here.
Yeah,
Right.
well, but the hypocrisy is never ending.
It's tough when it's your guy, is the thing. So
No, not.
I endure it. So we have radical shutting down of things, closure of things, firing of people, and it's
do we
great.
know? Do we?
Well, we do and we don't. Okay,
There are a lot of Nothingburgers.
we do and we don't. Okay, and what I mean by that is we can start with these things are playing to the hands of people who want to play into the nostalgia of everything, and the government's corrupt. He's cleaning up the government, right? He's cleaning up the government. We're screwing with USAID, and we have people posting that this is where your tax dollars have gone. $47 million for transgender education. Yeah,
Not true.
$47 million is $50 in the budget of the U.S.
But it's not even true.
Well, it's
That's
not
the
even
problem.
true, number
That part.
one. But even if I always like to play devil's advocate. Even if it was true, you're leaving out the 800 areas that USAID helps in. Like the farmers that are dealing with the bird flu epidemic.
1% of
Yes,
the federal budget.
barely. That's because they round it up.
Right.
They got to round it up to something.
Although it's interesting, in polls, Americans think it's way more. Like the smallest percentage, only like a few percentage points of people got it right. Most people think it's way higher. And in these polls, when they tell them what the correct percentage is, people are like, oh, we should maybe spend some more. But that's reality. I'm sorry to interject reality into this discussion.
I want to talk to you about your nothing burger comment, but the one thing I was going to say that's been heavy on my mind is that it's just crazy that I don't know if you want to classify it as every 4 years or every decade, or we're always having to find an enemy. It used to be the blacks, it used to be the women, it used to be the immigrants. Now it's the illegal immigrants. Now it's just we have to find this enemy.
Don't forget the Muslims.
Oh, don't forget those. Yes, don't forget the Muslims.
That
You are
was a
correct.
big one.
That was definitely a big one. I didn't mean to forget it on purpose, but it's just the fact that we always have to find an enemy. And within finding the enemy, we get to have these narratives pushed that aren't true. And Harold, you debated with Josh, who's, has a different opinions, but he was a very respectful debater, correct?
Correct.
He texts me because he just learned that Obama didn't give Pakistan the heads up when they were going to get bin Laden because he didn't want to be tipped off. And he said that was very risky because they were allies, but kudos for that. I said, no, he did not give them the heads up because he didn't want bin Laden to be tipped off by Pakistan. He didn't know how much of Al Qaeda was intertwined. So, we always talk about misinformation. And right now, it's like this is the Super Bowl of misinformation happening right now.
And a key point is you made an honest mistake, were corrected, accepted it, and moved on. There's a lesson in that for a lot of people. Yeah, okay, and you're right. All right, let me correct and move on with the correct information.
So, Dave, we're going to start with you because there's going
Okay.
to be a lot of people that they heard that because they keep posting these pictures and these screenshots and these reports. Why do you say it's a bunch of nothing burgers?
Well, I mean, it is and it isn't. There's two things. There's the nothing burgers in that a lot of things that Trump says, and by the way, are we focusing on education or are we just all over the
No,
map?
we're focusing on education. I just
All
wanted to
right,
start with this because this has been the hot button item
right, but
since here. Everybody's talking about the forced retirements of agents and the
right,
closing of.
those aren't nothing burgers. Those are moves by the president. But when they get overturned immediately by the courts,
Right.
is that a nothing burger? And a lot of a lot of these executive orders that Trump gives out, um, just one. I've got them queued up. I told you I was preparing for this stuff tonight. He tells people, one of his order about expands educational opportunities. President Donald J. Trump expands educational opportunities for American families. That's the title of the executive order, and it goes in all sorts of blah blah blah. Calls on Congress to pass the School Now Act. It calls for the administration to provide things, provide in-person learning options for low-income parents, reauthorizing some. None of these are action. It's a wish list. It's telling agencies to think about doing stuff. And so it's like, look, when you fire someone, that's doing something. When you freeze aid payments, that's doing something. When you direct the Department of Education, which apparently you're trying to get rid of anyway, to investigate how to do things, that in any other administration would be a note at a meeting to a cabinet secretary. Hey, why don't you look into this? And that's the kind of, we have a lot of that. At the same time, let me introduce another concept, the Humpty Dumpty concept.
Mm.
And I got to give credit to Daniel Dresner, a younger, better version of me. He's an academic. He talks about it mainly in terms of foreign policy decisions, things like freezing USAID funding. He's like, look, even if you reverse that decision, in the interim, you will destroy American credibility. You will enable China to move into the gap. And he said, Humpty Dumpty, all the king's horses and all the king's men can't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And so when we look at, we're getting some nothing burgers, and I think actually education may be getting a bigger number of those, but we're also getting some Humpty Dumpty moves where he's doing things like, for instance, on agriculture, if you suspend payments on programs that are paying farmers to do conservation projects on their lands, and those farmers have taken out loans, and you just temporarily freeze the payments, and in the meantime, the farmer defaults on his loan, Humpty Dumpty. Can't All the king's horses and all the king's men won't get that farmer his family farm again. I made that rhyme. So
They voted for him.
Yeah, it wasn't really good, but the point is that these are things we're seeing, and I think we've got to parse through a lot of these things and say, when is this a nothing burger, and just a rhetorical move, and maybe we don't need to worry about it? When is this a Humpty Dumpty, or if you don't like that thing, when is irreversible harm being done? Right? Which is the more technical term for it. I think we're seeing that with USAID. We're seeing that there's gonna be a body count. They aren't going to be Americans, mind you. So apparently, some people think those folks don't count. I tend to think all people count. But I'm a woke professor, right? The thing is, though, that we end up with that situation of when are we going to have these irreversible harm being done by some of these decisions.
Okay, if you look at my childhood, I really know what irreversible harm is. So I get you, Dave. my uncle shouldn't laugh at that statement. So you're
But what
exactly right. One of the problems
Okay,
that
that took a turn.
yeah, well, it's
Took a
one
I
of
was
the
turn. I'm out of here.
I was going to add to what Dave was saying. I think people need to understand executive orders are not law, and there's certain things that he is pushing via executive order that really has to go through Congress in order to fully implement. You can't go out and buy Greenland or Panama Canal or anywhere else for that matter without Congress co-signing or appropriating the requisite funds to make that happen. But, even when we talk about the Department of Education, he may do a lot of damage to it. But again, that was authorized, if I'm not mistaken, and I stand to be corrected, through Congress.
It is.
So a president can't just, I don't want it anymore. Congress would have to be the one to disband it. So I think once we teach people what is in the Constitution, first of all, encourage them to read it or even go on YouTube and listen to it, that would be helpful. But then by him just throwing all of these executive orders out there, what he's really doing is seeing what sticks so that he can move in that direction. Not only that, but we're missing the bigger picture here. You have President Musk in all aspects of our government who's gaining access to our personal and private information, as well as access to the purse strings, i.e., the Treasury. And there's not enough of a discussion about that. I'm talking about from the people. Members of Congress are trying to sound the alarm, but the public is not as vigilant as it should be in trying to get people to listen or get their elected officials to be made aware of their concerns, because now your social security information is out there. Your banking information is out there because, again, the government has archives of all of this data. And now what? Once it gets out there, and as I shared with someone, and I think Josh actually, he's been challenging me on a couple of my posts recently, but as I shared with someone recently, we have a tech titan that has access to data, and the data is the new oil. So we don't know what he's done. You can tell me it's read only, but the problem I have with that is if his aides locked federal employees out of their computers, you can't tell me it's just read only access. So there's some potential harm that's being done, and we don't know where our information is going or how much of it has been captured. So hopefully we as American people will focus on that and leave this Democrat Republican crap alone and look and see what's really happening in our country.
well, I hate how they just keep throwing out read only like that's no harm. You're reading the information. It's read only. Yeah, because you can't take a screenshot of anything or use your
Well, no,
cell
you
phone.
can download read-only information.
Yes, that
I
that's
mean,
what
you
I'm
can't
saying.
change it in the system, but
Right.
you once you read it, you own it.
Yeah, what
It's
you read,
information.
But
you know.
if you have the power to lock me out of the system, that means you also have the power to switch off the read only and full access,
No,
um,
yeah, we agree with that.
specification.
I'm just commenting on how they throw that out there, like, oh, it's
Yeah.
only read only. It's not a big deal.
Not
And I'm
read
like,
only.
no, I mean, okay, all right.
Well,
Um,
that's one of the lies, other than all of those condoms y'all spent $50 million on, but that's a whole nother story. I'm sorry.
did he say condos?
No.
I love there was an interview with a congressman who was talking about the condoms for Gaza, or he's like, and one of the interviewers is like, oh, I'm sorry, are you confusing that with a lie about the condoms for, the Taliban, or, he was kind of just mixing it up, and the lies are manifest. And,
Can't keep
but
track of them.
but at another level, this doesn't matter in some ways, or it's not going to tilt the balance. The people who are paying attention to issues like what Elon Musk has access to or not, I kind of feel we're in one echo chamber or another, right? And so a lot of Trump supporters that are paying attention are getting their news from OAN and Fox, and their TikTok feed is very different from my TikTok feed and or For You page, right? And so they're getting a very different set of information than we are. And it's the people in the middle, the people that voted Trump in, the balance of power, were the people that voted on egg prices, right? Were the people that were disengaged, weren't following. And so when I go about Nothingburgers, And when we talk about Musk, until Musk does something, or until the president does something, and he has started to do some things like these tariffs on steel and aluminum may actually occur, right? He backed off on the Mexico and Canada tariffs, which would have been effing something.
Yeah, but Dave,
Um,
doing something, it doesn't,
but
because
until you
something
have,
is,
well, I'm just saying, until you have a negative material impact on people's lives that can't be ignored,
but then that's too late.
well, too late for what?
Well, I'm saying just because something doesn't happen doesn't mean it's not being geared up to happen. And if you're not stopping it while it's being geared up, you know, it's too late. Why? It's that, and then you tell me if my analogy is way off base. It's that saying, I need a stop sign on this street. I need a stop sign on this street. And well, everything's fine. And then my kid gets ran over and then a stop sign gets put on the street.
That sounds
Right.
like Google.
Until something bad happens, how do you know that the person was right about the stop sign? Right.
I
But,
get what you're saying,
but
but I also get,
you want to be proactive to avoid that from happening.
Right. That's all great advice. I'm
Mhm.
saying that the people that voted Trump in, the balance of power, are not paying attention. They aren't thinking
I
about
love
the
it.
stop sign. They don't know that anyone is even asking for a stop sign. What
Gotcha.
they need to see is, I don't want to use someone being white,
I told you
being
he
killed.
was ornery. He
Um,
told you he was ornery when you came on here, Harold. You
but
told me he was ornery.
I'm just saying that these folks want, they need to see they're not paying attention to the process. They're paying attention to the outcomes. And inflation is going up, and Trump's trying to blame that on Biden. Ain't going to work because he got these people to vote because he was going to fix the economy. So that's one negative thing. And so what I'm talking about are kind of material impacts. And as long as Trump is saved from himself, whether it used to be by his advisors, recently it's been by the courts, he actually has to make material mistakes. And he's going to. I'm pretty sure he's going to. But until that happens, I don't see a lot of the people who are in between the two camps picking a side. And when is it too late? The midterms. The midterms in 2026, if we get a massive, and if we start seeing people, if we start seeing the congresspersons and the senators in agricultural states reacting to bad policy, right? They may go first. They may precede the election. We might see congressional support for Trump going away. Certainly, the midterms, we would expect Republicans to lose control of the two houses. Maybe, maybe not. Right.
So,
So that's what I see as being what's going to really play out here.
well, so okay. On one side, I get it. So, for instance, when you have Donald Trump says he wants to close the Department of Education, there's a bunch. People are going to be in an uproar, and kind of what you're saying is, hey, until he actually does it, it's just him again saying stuff.
Right. Until he actually blocks the funding, and it's just him saying it. And if he gets blocked in court from doing it because it takes Congress, we will be all outraged that Trump did it because we pay attention. The average person, or not the average, the people who are the swing voters, okay, this is more brouhaha in Washington, not an issue. When they see an actual impact, right? Like, will tuition in North Carolina go up because he's blocking indirect payments for indirect costs for research? And UNC is trying to hold the line on tuition payments right now. For 9 years, they haven't increased in-state tuition. And if he can, through executive order, screw something up, that's a material impact. And then people will be like, hey, wait a minute, my tuition just went up. And, see, I'm saying that that's a different level of reaction, and that will motivate and register with a group of people who are not in one echo chamber or the other, right? And who are actually the balance of power in the democracy.
Well, I think one other aspect of it is, and you're speaking from the higher education perspective or position. Me speaking from the K-12 position, the Department of Education, their funding that comes to us is in the form of supporting programs, i.e., like the free lunch and free breakfast programs. When we talk about providing support for children with disabilities and making sure that they can have the accommodations and those teachers are being properly trained and things of that nature, that's what's going to impact. Because when I hear a lot of commentary, there's a lot of people feel that the Department of Education really invests so much money in schools across the country as if they're paying teachers salaries when that's not the focus of their funding. It's mainly programming or programmatic structures that they allocate dollars to provide whatever services that are needed, supplemental services that are needed in the schools. And I try to encourage people, listen, know and understand where your funding comes from. But now on the flip side of that, looking at higher education, when we look at higher education, you got to look at now all these grant programs. They want to also privatize student loans, which we already know. And I'm still trying to understand that dynamic because you're taking my tax dollars. Another company is taking my tax dollars. Or matter of fact, my tax dollars are going to pay for my education. And then that other company is now billing me and charging me interest for my tax dollars that were used to support my education. I'm trying to make it make sense. And at any point, if we're looking to do this in an equitable fashion or a fair fashion, if you're using taxpayer dollars to pay for something, it should not be for a for-profit venture for a private entity. It should go directly back to the government. Technically, I would say at even 0% interest. Because again, I'm paying back my dollars or taxpayer dollars back to the taxpayer so that those funds remain or replenish that particular coffer, not serve as a benefit to a third party who had nothing to do with it, nothing invested in it, and they're the one gaining 100% of the benefit.
And not to, I mean, that debate about student loans is important, but to get back to the K through 12, right, that you were talking about, the 16 states that get the most funding for education voted for Trump, right?
Agreed. 100%.
100%. So, and a lot of people come out with this FAFO, right? F around and find out. And
I
I've
love it.
seen interviews with educators who are
Uh-huh.
freaking out because there's all this discussion. And again, that is within those groups going to have an impact. And my question, or the thing that I wonder about, is are we going to see Trump actually make a decision that doesn't get overturned by a court or stayed by a court? Does some, do kids start going hungry because of this? And when that
Oh, yeah.
happens, that will be a different day. That will be a moment, when rural states, when these 16 states have voted for Trump start having budget problems, then you're going to have an impact. I think honestly, the first people that are getting impacts are farmers. I think the agricultural sector is the one, because they have to pay, they have to pay stuff. They got to pay bills, and even a short-term disruption in funding. And I think
Yep.
he's better able to affect them. I think education in that sense may come second. But this is what I'm saying is when that happens, then we turn a corner, because then people who haven't been paying attention to politics go, hey, these kids are not getting fed. And that's wrong, right?
Well,
Or we don't have money for that. We don't have money for IEP, for resources for a student with an IEP. Those are the moments. And my question is, when do we get to that point? Or is he going to be saved from himself by court challenges?
Well, I mean, so far he's been successfully saved by court challenge, because once those things hit, you'll see the impact, and then, people will definitely open their eyes and become a little bit more, I guess you can say, angry or upset about what's transpiring. But the problem is he said he was going to do it, and you still voted for him. So when it hits you, because even like you referenced farmers overwhelmingly supported him, knowing what he did in his first term and how it hurt many of them and those that obviously had to give up the farm, so to speak.
Yeah.
So
And he
the,
said he
the,
was
the
going to do it. He did.
That's a lot of people have asked this question, which is you guys ask, you're more versed in this than I am. All the stuff he's doing now, why didn't he do it the first time? It's not like everything that he's trying to reverse or change now wasn't things that were going on when he was elected president the first time.
I think
Well,
he
I mean, there are certain things that he did attempt to do, in his first term, but I don't think he was given the same playbook then that he has now, because Project 2025 wasn't fully developed in 2016
Well,
or
it's like he
2015 or whatever.
so he got to do the rough draft, or he got to get practice in the first round, and now he knows what to do in the second, what he wants to do in the second round.
But that's why he let all those people go. He didn't bring back some of those same people from his first round go around because he knew they weren't supporting that agenda.
Well, he couldn't
So now
remember.
he intentionally, right, but what I'm saying,
He
he had
fired
the highest turnover. I mean, I don't know much about presidential history, but I have to believe that he had the highest turnover than any president ever serving in that position.
He did. He had a historically high turnover, and also in his first term, he relied on Republican establishment. And he look at his Secretary of Defense in the first term, right? He reaches out for General Mattis, right? He goes for a general, and he picks somebody that he admires but doesn't admire him, right? And he ends up with Mattis looking at him like, you're a freaking idiot, right? And telling his staff, this guy is an idiot. And this term, he can go and find somebody who didn't qualify for company command and, has been a Fox commentator, and, the dude with the slicked back hair and the American flag. And I just look at it with this little American flag. I'm talking about Pete Hegseth. He has this little
I
American, and
got
I'm
you.
like, do you pull out the American flag and blow your nose in it? Is that what you do? But this guy is basically not qualified to run a company in the military, but now he's in charge of the whole military, as opposed to Mad Dog Mattis, who is this general, was in charge of, rewrote he wrote the counterinsurgency handbook, right? So we have a guy that is qualified by conventional standards. Trump also had a lot of people in his government that were Republican establishment folks. And, Sean Spicer, I don't think he walked into that first day on the office thinking he was going to have to argue about crowd size. And, I don't think he was a Trump acolyte. Whereas the spokesperson now is got Trump, tattooed somewhere, I'm sure. And she is coming in, and she is totally MAGA. And so I think what we're seeing is he now has a core of Trump believers. And the guardrails in the first term were the advisors, Mark Meadows. Before him, General, who was his chief of staff, who was a Marine, also a general, who I forget oh man, I'm blocking on the guy's name. But, he had people that tried to protect him from himself. So the guardrails in the first term were within the White House. He doesn't have those because he can now he has enough acolytes. He can populate key positions with Trump true believers.
Mhm.
And that, I think, is a huge part of the difference that we're seeing between his first term and this one.
I absolutely love, and this is what's funny to me. Okay, his proposed. Remember the proposed cabinet, right? So I want you to see this list, and I'm not going to say anything. Let's just scroll down the list. Faces. There's some tall people in there. There's some people with long hair. They all kind of resemble each other. Oh, wait, there's one. There he is. What's his job? Oh, he's the housing and urban development guy. Oh, okay. There we go. We'll put that there. That makes sense. Like, it's just what, like, what are we
Yes.
doing? I don't mean to laugh, but I mean when I look at this and people say, there's diversity, you don't need DEI, you don't like the one person of color. I'm sure there's other people of other color ethnicities. This guy's pretty tan. The Sean Duffy, I don't know, but the one glaring person of color descent here is the housing and urban development guy, and everybody else just kind of fits the status quo. I'm just sorry. I was looking at something and that popped up, and he sticks out like a sore thumb. So I wanted to know what his job title was.
Well, I mean, it's the same job title he gave the neurosurgeon in his first term. So, I mean, no qualifications for housing whatsoever. But you put a neurosurgeon, not over health, but over HUD. So
Yes,
it's
and I
not a
mean to
matter
be
of getting.
real,
Matter of fact, you have what, a billionaire wife from wrestling. I guess he's married to over education. But we got
the
the most
reason why I
qualified.
saw that, Dave, is because I was looking, and the one thing you always say that you admired about Clinton was he hired an economist to do the economy. That always sticks in my
All
head.
Democrats do. Democrats, for whatever their faults, and there are many, I'm looking at you,
Yeah,
Joe
don't piss
Biden,
off her.
they nevertheless do respect expertise, and they will tend to pick economists. And that's one reason why I have typically I've kind of gotten more comfortable supporting Democrats because I'm very conservative when it comes to economics, okay? But they just started hiring economists and listening to them. And I'm just like, okay, if you're going to do that and the Republicans aren't, which side do I have more faith in, right? And you know, that's a big shift. And we don't have economists, and the very fact that we are seeing some of the economic policies, and the guy is spouting economic quackery, and it's just not even
Yes.
wrong. It's just so far out of the mix. And and you could say, let's just say that we're going to say the entire population of people studying economics are woke stupid people, and these guys know better. I don't buy it.
One statement and one question. So, what Harold's referring to is Linda McMahon, the wife of Vince McMahon, who is a longtime Trump friend. She's head of the Department of Education. I don't know what her qualifications are. So,
None.
but I have a question for you, Dave. Someone asked this earlier. Is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. the worst Kennedy ever?
Oh Jesus! Wow.
um Joe Kennedy's pretty bad. I mean, Joe Kennedy supported Hitler. So, uh, you know, uh, let's not try to pick the worst Kennedy because, I think that's a fool there. And
No, I
is
think
he
when somebody says that, they're just trying to describe how terrible. I guess I was.
not a
I told
huge
the
fan
guy, I
of
said,
Kennedy's,
"Well,
to be honest with you. You
no,
know, if I'm
no,
if I'm on
no."
it, like Robert Kennedy's father is probably I'll give him some props.
Well,
I'm
this is
not
the
a
thing
big
I was
fan
going to
of
say.
Ted,
When you're
not a big
setting the
fan of
standard, yeah, I was going to say when you're setting the standard at Robert Kennedy Sr. and John F. Kennedy, it kind of if that's where the standard is set, it's downhill from there.
Yeah, but somebody needs to help me understand, how do you put the person who sounds the least healthy on the planet over health? I mean, I'm
I
just
can't
saying.
listen to
I'm just
I
saying.
don't know.
Sounds. You know.
I was deathly sick and talking on the phone to someone. I said, "Oh my god, I hope I don't sound like RFK Jr." And they're like, "Oh no, you're still much better."
I'm just saying. He doesn't sound healthy at all, but he has all this advice. Wait a minute. Well, do you first.
His
Before you
advice
do the
is
American
not
people, do you?
vaccinate. He doesn't
Say again.
follow his own advice. He doesn't. He
So
vaccinated his
But
kids.
but but also, you're not seeing much in the news about these elevated cases of flu and coronavirus and RSV that's all over the United States.
Harold, you're saying a bunch of stuff that's not true.
Oh, my
Coronavirus is
bad.
not real. Can we get
My
over
bad.
it already? It's not a real thing.
Wow.
Stop it. What's always the thing that amazes me most about conspiracy people, Dave? They will believe the most complex conspiracies and follow the 90 different directions that the string of yarn goes, right? But if you bring up a simple one-line conspiracy of Elon Musk wants the president of the FAA fired, maybe that's because when his shuttle exploded, the FAA grounded him because FAA regulations say you cannot be airborne until your investigation is done, and that pisses him off. That's a straight line, one yarn line, and that's a bunch of nonsense, but they will believe the 90 yarn strings that go everywhere.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
a tush push. You can do the Philadelphia Eagles tush push and get that in the end zone, but yet they won't believe it.
I have no idea what he just said. Tush push.
Yeah, the tush
That
push. It's
sounds
a
like
Apparently, you,
some
you don't
woke
watch
stuff,
football, so
man. I don't know. Maybe they do
wait.
that in San Francisco, but
Yeah,
I don't think
whoa,
the people of Philadelphia are
whoa,
doing that.
whoa,
Oh, I don't.
stop it,
whoa.
Dave. Dave, you win. You went completely on the other coast with that one. I don't know how you got over there. But
You didn't go
Just
to
push.
Christian
It's right
grad
there.
but
Come on.
John,
Uh,
let's keep it moving. Keep it moving, John. Keep it moving.
school?
I don't
Oh,
follow hockey, so I don't know what you're talking
Oh
about.
wow.
oh, dear God in heaven.
That was the source of some controversy because they
Oh
thought
wow.
Peter was going to invite us, and
Uh,
we're sitting out back enjoying a fire. Like, all right, I guess we just don't make the list. And
you know what?
um,
That's a common thing when somebody thinks someone else is responsible for inviting you to the shindig and that person doesn't. And you're
yeah,
like,
that's
wait,
why
where's Dave?
there's no rancor. I'm not,
I
I'm just.
thought you
As
did.
a matter of fact, we weren't invited, and I was only pissed that they started blaming Peter. I'm like, if Peter was having the Super Bowl party, I guarantee you I would have been invited. But he wasn't. So I don't mind that you guys overlooked us, forgot about us, but don't blame
Well, you
Peter.
know who invited? Well, you know who invited me, and I live the furthest away.
Who?
Peter.
John, you're being messy. You're being messy. Keep it
Yeah.
moving.
So let's.
No,
You're
I
being
don't know
messy.
how
I
much
just
of
Keep it
this
happen to
moving.
be
we're gonna
on.
have to cut out. Do we need to start a new
No, we're
intro?
not cutting it out. That's what sends the show off the rails and makes it
All
authentic. We're not,
right.
we're not a big
I have no
cable news
rancor.
network.
So people understand. My wife and I, we go to Maine forever in the summer. We go constantly to see our grandchildren. We blow off our friends in town at the drop of a hat. The fact that they're just not used to us being around and they forget about us. And there's like, why not? Why wouldn't they? That would be weird if they didn't. And so I'm like, get over ourselves. It's no problem. We enjoyed our fire
No, I
outside.
get it. I mean, I get invited because I'm the DEI friend. All right, so we're gonna go to circling back to education. Well, just circling back to all the things that are happening in general, because the thing I always think about is what is the end game? I can tell when someone's trying to purposely disrupt. Is that the goal? Is that the goal to just be an anarchist? Like,
Mm.
what is the end game here?
There isn't one. I would say with populists, part of their problem is their very formulation of the problem is that the virtuous us, the virtuous public that they represent, is threatened by these elites, these woke teachers who are indoctrinating their children. One of the executive officers, executive orders from the White House was entitled "Ending Radical Indoctrination in K through 12 Schooling." And so, this is the culture war aspect where we blame this group. And the problem is that once you become the power, once you get into power, and all populists have this problem, what do? Right? How do you have gotten power by saying you're defending someone from a threat, but now you're in power. Now you're the elite. And so for a lot of populists, this is a paradox of their political position versus how they govern. And so I'm going to throw out there that there isn't an end game, that they don't really have a credible way of dealing with this, and they have to continually remanufacture threats in order to be consistent, or they have to change their nature, right? Which I don't necessarily see Trump doing.
Well, my perspective is the end game is always going to be money. At the end of the day, the goal is to privatize education so that they can draw all of those resources, those fiscal resources, to those private entities. And that's what's going on with the charter school movement. Not only that, but through that charter school movement, we're seeing the resegregation of America as it relates to education is concerned. Because a lot of those schools, based on where they're located, you're eliminating a certain population in favor of a specific population. And so, whereas you in surrounding communities were bused to the same school, now we're creating these little silos everywhere, which is leading to, again, a lack of diversity and inclusion as opposed to it. Not only that, but these two students with disabilities are being left out of this whole equation. Because charter schools, if a child with a disability applies, they can reject them, they can deny them. And I think until we begin to litigate, and that's something that we're talking about with the NAACP, but until we begin to litigate this, we're going to continue to see the consistent erosion of public education for the benefit of one segment of our population, but not all within our population. And that's where I see education going. And unfortunately, it's not to the benefit of all students who are in need of and mandated to go to school at some institution or another.
David, looked like you were going to say something.
No, I think that rent seeking is absolutely, I mean, that's what we're describing here. That's the fancy term for it. And yeah, that's absolutely, we're seeing that. Can you make a buck off of it? It is a common factor of populist movements is they complain about corruption, but then they do the whataboutism. The Democrats were corrupt, so we'll be corrupt, right? Democrats have conflict of interest, Hunter Biden's laptop, so we're going to have massive conflicts of interest, and that's okay. That is definitely renting. Like I say, I think that qualifies as a name. That's a good answer. I was thinking he had a good answer to that, but I do think that doesn't get us anywhere positive. Whether it gets us somewhere sufficiently negative to trigger kind of a backlash, the 2026 elections, right, are where this ends or doesn't end, right? You may see defections from the Republican coalition prior to that, but I think the 2026 midterm elections, which you tend to think would go Democratic anyway, right? The Senate has a lot of Republican seats that are up for grabs. The House is on a razor thin. They lost ground in the last one, even though Trump won. So you would expect a bloodletting in 2026 that will only be exacerbated by inflation going up. Inflation is at 3%. It already went up. Again, I go back, hey, look, the economy is about the economy. Some things that Trump did in terms of threats might have spiked it, but a lot of it's the avian flu, prices of eggs, that sort of thing. But it's edged up to 3%. But Trump is definitely doing shit that is going to spark greater inflation, like tariffs, right? And a lot of these other things. And meanwhile, he's trying to tell the Fed, he's pressuring the Fed to not raise interest rates. Guess what? Raising interest rates is how you fight inflation, right? It's the primary thing. So it's kind of like, oh, well, don't give the patient antibiotics and see how things go. They're not going to go well.
You know who would tell him to do that? An economist.
Hmm?
You know who would tell him to do that? Not to do that? An economist.
But will he listen? That's the question.
Yeah, I'm missing how an economist would tell someone to not take.
No. What he's saying is
Yeah.
in answer to you, if Trump had an economist running the Fed,
Yeah. If he had,
they would tell him or advise him the way that you've indicated.
no, he's got
response.
Peter Navarro.
Exactly. Our point
Who,
The way you say that name, I can always tell when Dave is not impressed with a person in a position. The way he says their name.
this guy before Trump was what we would politely call a heterodox economist. He couldn't get a job at a regular university in an economics department because he was so outside the box. I used to use him in my international political economy classes. First of all, he was like one of the only people who would give a different point of view on tariffs and trade policy. And so I would use him as the counterpoint, and then the economists would shred everything he said in other readings I read. But again, because I am an actual academic, not one of these imagined woke ideologues, I nevertheless had his point of view in there because I had to provide my students access to all points of view. But he was notably a wackadoodle in that profession. And it was, then he gets into the White House and then he goes to jail, does time for Trump. And now he's back, maybe. I don't even know if he has a position. And it's crazy that this guy's in there. So the fact that I'm reacting to it, the whole economics profession was there with me, ahead of me doing it before this. But we watch too many science fiction movies where the guy who has the crazy idea that the pyramids are landing ships for aliens turns out to be right, right? So that we still we disregard the entire weight of the economics profession and their judgment and consensus. So,
One thing, and I'm a little random today because the problem with us, not having the kind of budget to meet like on a weekly basis. There's just so much you consume between the times we meet. So
mhm.
even when I have a particular topic, I have these things burning in my head that I want to throw at you guys. Sometimes it has nothing to do with the topic. Like Pete, how do you say his name? Pete Hegseth.
Pete
Uh
Hegseth.
huh.
And
Except,
I got the other guy. It was one of the interviews, one of the press conferences I was watching, and I just kept watching him and the other guy every 5 seconds go, his leadership, under his leadership, Trump's great leadership. And it was like they just kept serenading him and saying nothing
Yeah.
for the entire speech.
These executive orders I'm quoting, they all have this North Korean dear leader propaganda lines in them that they're all, and people said that about the airplane crash, right? That
Mhm.
Trump comes out and holds a briefing, and instead of having any experts in the industry, he has his people come out who sycophantically lead with praise of his leadership during this crisis. The F does the president have to do in the hours after a plane crash, right?
mm,
Yeah.
There's nothing.
He made the 911 call, I think. Like,
oh,
what did he, this is just,
Meanwhile, Pete Hegseth is over there talking about uh, how NATO membership for Ukraine is off the table, and one of the NATO people said, "Well, we recognize that it probably wasn't ever going to happen, but we weren't going to concede it to the Russians ahead of time." And I was like, "Ooh, sick burn" from a political science point of view. It's like Pete Hegseth is over there negotiating with himself, showing why he is a piss poor choice to have any input on strategic direction of the United States. Yeah, I'm not
right.
pulling punches on this guy.
oh, people who are not really allies or disguise themselves as allies of the United States love that he's over there being the person that's talking about the direction. It's like one of those things when people talk about things that they have. I try to stay away from things I have no idea what I'm talking about. Sometimes I'll concede to you guys. But one of the things that's always a hot button topic is how much money is spent in other countries when we have problems here. And the people who say those things don't understand. If you're not helping these countries, someone else will, and it may not be the person that you want. The amount of money that China spends in underdeveloped African countries is staggering. And we know why they do it.
Well, part of what the thing about China is they are the second largest economy in the world and they have a savings rate close to 50%. They don't consume anything because they're so, they keep increasing their consumption, but they haven't been able to spend all the money they've made. And so they are kind of like this is the way the Saudis were, right? They had all this oil wealth coming in, a small population. Where do you spend all that money, right? So they end up sending it overseas and investing it. China has this huge amount of money coming in, and what do they do with it all? And a big part of their Belt Road initiative is, I always think, is hey, look, part of it is they're trying to park money. They're trying to get, they're trying to find money, but they certainly aren't going to be stupid about it. They're gaining influence. They're gaining out, they're gaining friends. They're making contacts around the world. They're going to states that the United States is not necessarily dealing with. And now that the U.S. is shooting itself in the foot, they're going to be kind of unmatched in a lot of the area. And so for all this concern about China, you've just surrendered the soft power influence to all of that to China at a time when they were going to have the upper hand because they've got more money than we've got in terms of disposable cash that they can invest in any damn thing they want. So it
But
doesn't
hey,
make sense.
we can fix that when we buy Greenland and Iceland and Trinidad and Tobago. Okay. All right.
Don't
Uh,
forget Panama.
Next, don't forget Panama. We'll talk about Donald Trump's wish list.
and Canada as the 51st state.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I love the Canadians TikTok and social medias where they're like, "No, thank you, we're okay."
But the fact that I'm keep adding these things on is important because I'm disrupting your flow. You were ready to move on to something, and I brought up other very serious. Panama and Canada were serious additions that Trump has made. That's the chaos factor. That's what he's doing. He's making it impossible to focus on any one thing, to keep your train of thought before he says some other I won't say bat spit crazy, but he says some other disruptive thing, which he would probably accept disruption as what he's doing. That's the part of the chaos, the planned chaos of the Trump administration.
That's why I had my friend ask my friend, "Do you really want to? Did Harold freeze or is he praying? What happened?" Oh,
well,
okay.
I'm good. I'm listening.
He's
One of
sick of my shit.
my
That's
friend, he was moving to Canada and he never ended up moving. And I said, "What happened?" He goes, "Well, we had everything lined up and the prime minister changed certain laws in immigration and now we can't go, but you can help me move to the US." I said, "If you if you think said if you think the immigration law screwed you over in Canada, you're barking up the wrong tree, buddy."
Get ready for Guantanamo. That's all I'm saying.
Uh,
yeah, we haven't even gotten there on that stuff.
oh my
Uh,
gosh. I.
Sickening, but hey,
I
it's a
gotta say,
reality.
I got to inject something in though. I saw a very interesting post by um, Will Westmoreland. He goes by his name,
Oh,
kind of
I
like
thought you were going to say cello. Okay, go ahead.
no, Will Westmoreland. He is, hey, I'm your agricultural policy and elections expert, and he's some guy with a hat, looks like me, right? And he's out there talking about but he's a farmer and he's talking about it, and he's talking about agricultural policy, and he was appealing to people, saying, "Look, they're screwing up," and he was appealing. He rejects the f around and find out thing as being hurtful and disrespectful. And he reached out. He was trying to say to rural voters and rural people, he said, look, two things they said that I think were really interesting. One, he said, look, I'm not asking you to admit you made a mistake, but please admit that you've been lied to. And I said, that's an interesting approach to people who voted for Trump in these agricultural areas. And then he picked up on the look, these guys have used the culture wars to distract from their lack of policy understanding and their lack of good policy on agriculture. We need to focus on holding them accountable for agricultural policy, for good public policy, and not be distracted by the culture wars, which is what I'm always talking about. Hey, when you have the enemy image and you're talking about these dangerous people, he was referring it to as that. And I felt he, besides having good analysis of the policy, that was an interesting approach. And I thought that was noteworthy today, that I just saw that today.
Well, I'm of the FAFO clan, and at the end of the day, as I heard someone say, the protest date was November 5th. To protest 2 months, 3 months after the fact, you know, especially when he told you what he was going to do, and you still cast your vote in that direction, and that's why I've seen even on, whether it's TikTok, whether it's YouTube, whether it's even on Facebook, I'm sorry, on Instagram, people, more specifically black people, are saying, no, we're not going out and protesting, even though we don't like what's happening, because when we needed you to support us, you didn't show up.
Now,
And it's not that it's going to unite anyone, it's going to still leave us divided in many respects. But the problem that we have is, there's not one group of marginalized people that were not touched at some point by this last election cycle, by Mr. Trump. And sadly, all of those marginalized groups, with the exception of black people, voted in higher percentages in support of the gentleman who's now deporting them, their family members, and others. And that's what's disturbing, that has disturbed a lot of black people as it relates to post election reaction, because we're sitting back, many of them are sitting back and saying, we told you so. You wouldn't listen to us. Now he showed you. I guess you're from Missouri. So hey, listen, it's gonna be a rough ride. Let's go.
You know, I can only go off of people that I know personally because I know some of those videos, not a massive, some of those videos are kind of just people trolling. They're fake. They didn't even vote for him, but they're making a video. I have a friend personally who her husband, first election and second election, rabid Donald Trump supporter. She is not. Okay. She called me last week and she said, "You won't believe what happened." I said, "What?" She said, "Donald Trump was on TV talking. My husband walked in. Now he wears the t-shirts and everything, you know, super supporter. My husband walked in, turned and looked at the TV and said, 'He's a fucking idiot,' and then just walked off angrily into the kitchen. And I said, 'What happened?' She goes, 'I don't know.' And I'm just like, it took you two pledges of your of your vote in 2 weeks to figure that out.
Well,
Well,
and no,
go
please
ahead,
go.
Dave.
No,
No,
please go.
No, Harold,
well,
take your plane back off the runway. Go.
Let her rip.
the problem that we have that I have to do so up to this point is we have a lack of empathy,
Mhm.
in this country. And what I mean by that, even just looking at the Latin community alone, just looking at them, when Trump was attacking Mexicans, no other Latin group stood up and said, "Hey, listen, that's wrong." When he attacked Venezuelans, when he attacked, Asians and all of these different groups, all of every Muslims and black people. Then when he attacked Puerto Rico or Puerto Ricans right before the election, they were up in arms. But see, you didn't say anything when he attacked, and because we were so siloed and divided in that regard, this is what allowed this whole outcome to take place. We lack empathy in this country, and until we develop a certain level of empathy, we're going to continue to repeat these things. And just because, quote unquote, he appeared like a strong man. Now, one thing in my analysis of Democrats, you spend a lot of time saying he's a dictator. He's going to be a dictator. He's going to be a dictator. Well, what's the worldview of a dictator? Someone who goes around and what? Kills off whomever he wants to kill and does all of these things. He didn't do that in 2016 to 2020. So it's hard to sit up here and help people envision him as a dictator because that's not what they see when they think of Castro or the Venezuelan dictator or Colombia dictator. And I forget their names, so I didn't want to say names and get them all mixed up. But in any way, when we've seen these other dictators on the world stage, we know the destruction that they did. And when you frame someone as something and that people can't envision it, that whole message is going to be going over people's heads or they're going to be ignoring it. And so that's one thing that caused this election cycle to go in the direction that it did. However, until we go back to the need for empathy in our country, then we're going to continue to allow these individuals like him and others in the future to come aboard and be elected into office and unfortunately do bad things in our country. And I land.
I'm sorry, I got distracted. I saw a clip of Pierce Morgan talking American politics, and that always makes my head hurt. I'm like, why does he even have an opinion? And he just says that if it's not James O'Brien, get out of my face. Dave, go ahead.
Exactly.
I'm
That's the
sorry,
only dude in England that can talk.
Dave. Wrap us up here with your thoughts, your overall assessment. Harold has landed his plane, and now you can get into your helicopter and lift.
I'll just say I am.
Skateboard.
I could be wrong, but I'm sticking with this idea that the balance of power lies in people who are going to vote off of material issues. And I think that a lot of the people, Trump supporters, are a minority of the people that are of the electorate. They are not the people that got him over the top. And the question is, will there be sufficient negative material impacts that, and we're seeing some anecdotes of this. You mentioned this one person walking out the room. There have been videos where news agencies interview farmers. I keep going back to the farmers. They seem to be the canary in the coal mine on this issue. And there are a lot of them saying, would you vote for Trump? Do you regret it? And they're like, yes, yes, yes. So apparently Trump can shoot someone on Fifth Avenue. He can't take their family farm away, which actually, if you think about it, makes a lot of sense, right? Like what he did to other people is not their problem. but when he actually impacts them. And the negative consequences are coming, I think. And the next protest date is November 2026. But before then, certain Congress people, representatives and senators might start fearing, so I mean, let's see what these special elections in Florida do, right? We're going to have an early bellwether, right, of, hey, if the Republicans don't do as well in safe Republican districts, that'll be a warning, and we'll see how well the congressional coalition hangs together for Trump. That could be something that happens in the short term. So that's what I think. Democracy still counts. People will vote out someone who didn't do a good job, and Biden got caught up in that. And I think whether or not it's fair, whether or not it's and Trump maybe get caught foisted it on his own petard that way.
Interesting. Well, guys, I always hate, I'm going to cheer up. I sound like, I'm at a funeral. We're only a couple days in. So, but yeah, it's like, it's like when you're rooting for that football team that, has no chance of going to the Super Bowl.
None.
But you're
I like
trying to,
Peter.
yeah, you're going to the Brown Stadium and you're just trying to get as much joy out of it as you can. And when you leave at the end of the day, like Dave said, you feel like you've been in San Francisco and you got your tush pushed.